He's drilling into the door. He's got a weapon. You need to send SWAT, he's aggressive. That was the first thing I heard when I stepped out onto my own front porch, a half-drunk mug of dark roast in one hand and a fresh deadbolt in the other. Across the meticulously manicured lawn of Lot 42, Brenda Holloway, the self-appointed dictator of Cypress Creek, was screaming into her iPhone like she was auditioning for a daytime soap opera, pointing a trembling, manicured finger right at my chest. I couldn't help but let out a dry, tired chuckle, the kind you develop after 25 years of negotiating with cartel lieutenants and navigating federal bureaucracy, because the irony was just too rich to ignore. The only reason I was changing my locks on a Tuesday afternoon was because she was the one who had broken into my house 3 days ago. But Brenda didn't know that I knew, and she certainly didn't know that the weapon I was holding was a Phillips head screwdriver, or that the man she was trying to frame as a violent intruder was actually the rightful homeowner who just wanted his privacy back. When the sirens finally wailed in the distance, cutting through the humid Florida air, I saw a smirk curl on her lips, a look of pure, unadulterated triumph. She thought she had me. She thought this was the moment she finally crushed the new guy who refused to measure his grass with a ruler, but what she didn't realize was that she wasn't calling the cavalry on a criminal, she was calling my old co-workers on a friend. If you've never lived in a deed-restricted community, let me paint the picture for you. Imagine a place where the silence is weaponized, where the color of your curtains is a matter of public debate, and where people like Brenda believe they've been ordained by God to enforce the bylaws with the zeal of a religious inquisitor. I moved to Cypress Creek about 4 months ago, looking for quiet, looking to decompress after retiring from a career that kept my blood pressure permanently in the red zone. I was a lead tactical negotiator for the DEA, which means I spent half my life talking bad guys down from ledges and the other half digging through evidence to put them away. I just wanted a porch, a grill, and zero drama, but then I met Brenda. She showed up on my driveway while the moving truck was still idling, clipboard clutched to her chest like a shield, wearing oversized sunglasses and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, saying, "Welcome to the neighborhood, Mr. Thorne, we have standards here, strict ones," and before I could even shake her hand, she was already noting that my truck was, technically, a commercial vehicle because it had a toolbox in the bed. I brushed it off, told her my name was Elias, and tried to be the good neighbor. I smiled, I nodded, I took the 3-inch binder of rules she shoved at me, but I should have known right then that peace was never an option. It started small, sticky notes on my trash can if it was left out past 4 p.m., passive-aggressive emails about the unsightly shade of beige on my patio cushions, just petty tyrant stuff that I mostly ignored because, frankly, after staring down guys with AK-47s, a middle-aged woman with a label maker didn't exactly spike my adrenaline. But Brenda hated being ignored. It drove her crazy that I didn't flinch when she threatened fines, that I didn't apologize when she complained about my dog barking once at a squirrel, so she escalated. She started watching. I'd catch her blinds twitching whenever I left the house, saw her pacing the sidewalk with a tape measure when she thought I was at the grocery store, checking if my hedges were exactly 4 feet high. It was annoying, sure, but I let it slide until last week. I had to fly up to D.C. for a mandatory debriefing on an old case, just a 48-hour trip, but when I walked back into my house on Friday night, the air felt different. You develop a sixth sense for it in my line of work, the displacement of air, the subtle shift of objects. I smelled it first, a cloying, heavy scent of lavender perfume that definitely wasn't mine, hanging in the hallway. I walked into my home office and saw my desk chair was pulled out, my file cabinet was slightly ajar, and a stack of mail I'd left on the counter had been reshuffled, with the bank statements moved to the top. My gut tightened, not with fear, but with a cold, sharp anger. I didn't call the cops immediately. I went straight to the server room in the basement where I keep the hub for my security system. I'd installed internal cameras the week I moved in, high def, hidden in the smoke detectors. Old habits die hard. And there she was, in 4K resolution, Thursday, 10:14 a.m., Brenda Holloway, using a spare key that the builder must have given the HOA for emergencies, letting herself in along with a terrified-looking maintenance kid. I watched, jaw clenched, as she marched through my kitchen, opening my pantry, checking my fridge, and then, this is where I saw red, she walked into my office, started flipping through my personal documents, taking pictures with her phone, muttering something about unauthorized business activity, because she was convinced I was running a chop shop or something out of my den. She had violated the one thing I valued more than anything else, my sanctuary, and in that moment, I knew I couldn't just sue her, I had to dismantle her. But you don't take down a person like Brenda by yelling, you let them dig their own grave and then you politely hand them the shovel. So, I downloaded the footage, backed it up to the cloud, and called a locksmith buddy of mine, a guy named Rick who owes me a few favors, and told him to come over Tuesday morning to drill out every single lock on the perimeter. When Rick showed up, his van clearly marked 24/7 locksmith. Brenda was on him like a hawk on a field mouse. She came storming across the street, demanding to see permits, demanding to know why we were modifying HOA-compliant hardware. I just stood there, sipping my coffee, and said, "Brenda, I'm securing my property, go home," and that's when she snapped, the mask slipped, and she went full panic mode, pulling out her phone and dialing 911, screaming that I was an intruder, a squatter, a violent criminal breaking into one of our residents' homes. Rick looked at me, eyes wide, whispering, Elias, should we stop?" And I just smiled, leaned against the doorframe, and said, "Keep drilling, Rick, this is about to be the best part of your week." When the cruisers turned the corner, lights flashing but no sirens, typical for a burglary in progress call in a quiet zone, Brenda practically sprinted toward them, waving her arms like she was landing a plane on an aircraft carrier. Two officers stepped out, hands resting near their holsters, scanning the scene, and I recognized the lead deputy immediately, Miller, a good kid. I'd run a joint task force training with his precinct 3 years ago. Brenda was breathless, her face flushed with the ecstasy of power, shouting, "There! That's him! The man in the jacket! He's destroying the door! Arrest him immediately, I want him in cuffs!" Miller looked at Brenda, then looked at me standing calmly on the porch, leaning on the railing with one hand in my pocket. The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on. Brenda was practically vibrating, waiting for the takedown, waiting for the violence she had concocted in her head. Miller walked up the driveway, past Brenda, ignoring her screeching demands, and stopped at the bottom of the steps. He squinted for a second, then his posture completely changed, the tension left his shoulders, a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth, and he instinctively straightened up. "Director Thorne," Miller said, his voice carrying clearly across the silent lawn. "Retired, Miller, just Elias now," I replied, raising my coffee mug in a lazy salute. "Copy that, sir," Miller laughed, relaxing his hand away from his belt. "We got a call about a violent break-in, suspect described as unhinged and dangerous. Does this look dangerous to you, deputy?" I asked, gesturing to Rick, who was currently installing a shiny new brass plate. Brenda froze, her mouth hung open, her eyes darting between me and the officer like her brain was trying to process a syntax error. "Wait, you know him?" "Officer, he's a criminal. He's changing the locks without HOA approval. That's a violation of Article 4. Miller turned to her, and the look he gave her wasn't polite anymore, it was the look cops give to people who waste their time. "Ma'am, changing locks on your own home isn't a crime, but filing a false police report is a misdemeanor, and if you scream at me one more time, it's going to be disorderly conduct." The color drained from Brenda's face so fast she looked like a ghost in a floral blouse. But he's... I'm the president. I have rights. And Mr. Thorne has the right not to be harassed, Miller said, turning his back on her to shake my hand. I watched her crumble. It wasn't a loud defeat, it was a silent implosion. She stood there alone on the driveway, realizing that her badge of authority meant absolutely nothing in the real world. But as she slunk back to her house, dragging her feet, I knew it wasn't over. People like Brenda don't learn lessons, they just hold grudges, and sure enough, as the sun went down, I saw the light in her office turn on, burning late into the night. She was plotting, rewriting the narrative in her head, convincing herself she was the victim, and I knew the war had just officially begun. I thought the humiliation of the police salute might buy me a week of peace, maybe even a month, but I underestimated the sheer resilience of a bruised ego. Brenda didn't retreat, she regrouped, and by the next morning, my mailbox was stuffed with what looked like a manifesto. It was a notice of violation, thicker than a phone book, citing me for unauthorized hardware modification, public disturbance, and, this was my favorite, creating a hostile environment for community leadership. The fines totaled $3,000, due immediately, or she threatened to put a lien on my house. She wasn't just coming for my money, she was trying to paperwhip me into submission, a tactic that probably worked on the terrified young couples and the elderly folks in the neighborhood, but she forgot she was dealing with a guy who used to read 500-page redacted cartel indictments for fun. I didn't pay a dime. Instead, I went to the grocery store, bought 5 pounds of ribeye, 3 racks of ribs, and a keg of local IPA, and then I made a few phone calls to the boys back at the agency. See, Brenda had also updated the community website that morning with a new rule in bold red text: all gatherings of more than 6 people require 48-hour written approval from the board. She thought she had boxed me in, thought she could suffocate my social life before it even started, so I decided to test the limits of her jurisdiction. Saturday rolled around, a perfect, golden Florida afternoon, and the first guests arrived. It wasn't just a few friends, it was a reunion. 2 black SUVs with government plates rolled up and parked perfectly legally on the street, followed by a couple of unmarked Chargers. Out stepped my old unit, guys and girls I'd trusted with my life, wearing polo shirts and cargo shorts, but carrying that distinct, watchful energy that you never really lose. Then came the local boys, Miller and his partner, off-duty but still very much imposing. By 1 p.m., my backyard was filled with about 25 people, laughter mixing with the smoke from the smoker, the smell of charcoal and victory drifting right across the street to Brenda's window. I saw her curtains twitch, it was clockwork, and within 5 minutes, she was marching across the asphalt, clipboard in hand, flanked by the vice president of the HOA, a meek guy named Jerry who looked like he'd rather be undergoing a root canal. Brenda didn't even knock on the gate, she just reached over to unlatch it, and that's when the music stopped. "Excuse me," she shrieked, her voice cutting through the conversation like a rusty saw. "This is an unauthorized gathering. I have not received an application. You are in direct violation of the bylaws." The yard went silent, 25 pairs of eyes that had stared down drug lords and human traffickers, turned to look at Brenda. I stepped forward, holding a pair of tongs, calm as a monk. "Brenda, the gate was closed. You're trespassing." "I am the president," she yelled, her voice trembling with rage. "I have the right to inspect violations. You are disrupting the peace. I'm calling the sheriff." From the back of the crowd, a deep voice chuckled. It was Detective Reynolds, a guy built like a linebacker. "You gonna call the sheriff, ma'am? I think he's grabbing a beer out of the cooler." The crowd erupted in laughter, genuine, belly-shaking laughter, and Brenda looked around, confused, until she saw the actual county sheriff, in shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, wave at her with a bottle of Pilsner. "Hiya, Brenda," he called out. "Burgers are great, you want a plate?" Her face turned a shade of purple I didn't know existed in nature. She looked from the sheriff to the marshals to the DEA agents, realizing that her threat of authority was a joke to people who actually enforced the law. She sputtered, backed up, bumped into Jerry, and then spun around, fleeing back to her house amidst the sound of jeers and clapping. It was a victory, sure, but I knew the final blow had to be legal, decisive, and public. 3 days later, the emergency disciplinary hearing she called was the main event. She had summoned the entire neighborhood to the clubhouse to vote on my expulsion from the community, a power she didn't actually have but was desperate to exercise. The room was packed, neighbors whispering, sensing blood in the water. Brenda stood at the podium, looking haggard but defiant, listing my crimes, painting me as a menace who brought armed gangs into the neighborhood. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't walk up to the podium, I just stood up from my chair in the front row, holding a single, slim black binder. "Brenda," I said, my voice low but projecting to every corner of the room. "We can talk about my barbecue, or we can talk about last Thursday." "I don't know what you're talking about," she snapped, but her eyes flickered with fear. I connected my tablet to the room's projector system, had asked Jerry for the password earlier, and he gave it up in 2 seconds flat because he was terrified of me. "Exhibit A," I said, and the screen behind her lit up. The footage played in silence, Brenda, in her signature floral blouse, jiggling the lock on my back door. Brenda entering my kitchen. Brenda rifling through my mail. The gasps from the neighbors were audible. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God, she did that to me too." "This is a violation of federal privacy laws, burglary, and trespassing," I narrated calmly, flipping a page in my binder. "And Exhibit B, the logs from the keycard system showing you've entered 5 other homes in this neighborhood when the owners were at work." Brenda was shaking now, gripping the podium so hard her knuckles were white. This is manipulated. You're twisting the truth." I was inspecting for compliance. "You were snooping, Brenda," I said, cutting her off. "And you were looking for leverage." The doors to the clubhouse opened, and 2 uniformed deputies walked in, not for the barbecue this time. They walked straight down the aisle, the sound of their boots heavy on the tile floor. They stopped in front of Brenda. "Brenda Holloway?" one deputy asked. "Yes," she squeaked. "We have a cease and desist order from the district court regarding the harassment of Mr. Elias Thorne, and a summons for questioning regarding multiple counts of unlawful entry." He handed her the envelope. "You are to step down from any position of authority in this HOA pending the investigation. If you contact Mr. Thorne or step foot on his property, you will be arrested. Do you understand?" The room was deadly silent, you could hear the air conditioning humming. Brenda looked at the envelope, looked at the neighbors who were now staring at her with a mix of pity and disgust, and finally, looked at me. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just looked at her with the tired resignation of a man who wished it didn't have to end this way. She dropped the gavel. It clattered on the floor, a hollow sound that marked the end of her reign. She walked out the side door without a word, shrinking with every step, a queen exiled from her own imaginary kingdom. The neighborhood changed after that night, it was like a spell had broken. People started leaving their garage doors open, planting flowers that weren't on the approved list, actually talking to each other on the sidewalks. I didn't run for president when the seat opened up, I nominated Jerry, who turned out to be a decent guy once he wasn't being bullied. Brenda's house went up for sale a month later. I saw the moving truck, no clipboard inspection this time, just boxes of a life built on control being packed away. The morning she left, I found a plain white envelope in my mailbox. No postage. Inside, on a piece of stationery, was a short note in jittery handwriting, I only wanted it to be perfect. I didn't know how to stop. I read it twice, standing on my driveway, feeling the warm Florida sun on my face. It was sad, really, she had spent so much time trying to manicure the world that she forgot how to live in it. I crumpled the note, tossed it in the trash, and walked back up to my porch. I had a brisket to smoke, and for the first time in months, the only eyes watching me were the birds in the trees. It's funny how people think power is about shouting the loudest or having the biggest rulebook, but real power? Real power is knowing you can burn the whole house down, but choosing to just change the locks instead.